You think black Christmas tables in the 1960s and 70s looked like they do now? Think again. Before convenience stores and instant mixes, African American families created holiday feasts requiring weeks of preparation and generations of wisdom. Let's dig into 30 Christmas soul foods that have quietly disappeared. Bourbon-soaked fruitcake was the crown jewel of black Christmas celebrations, requiring weeks of preparation that modern bakers rarely possess. Families began mixing dried fruits, nuts, and candied citrus in late October, letting them soak in bourbon until plump and fragrant. The batter was dense with molasses, brown sugar, and warm spices that filled kitchens with aromas announcing the season had arrived. Grandmothers wrapped finished cakes in cheesecloth soaked with more bourbon, storing them where they aged like fine wine. Every few days, someone would unwrap the cakes and brush them with fresh spirits, transforming simple ingredients into something extraordinary. By Christmas morning, these cakes had developed depth no store-bought version could match. Sliced thin and served alongside coffee, they became centerpieces of holiday tables from Georgia to Illinois. The tradition required commitment and trust that good things come to those who wait. Christmas Eve oyster stew held a sacred place in African American holiday traditions, served as families gathered before midnight church services. The preparation was deceptively simple. Fresh oysters simmered gently in whole milk and butter until their edges curled and the broth turned creamy with briny sweetness. Black families along the eastern seaboard and Gulf Coast had access to fresh oysters, making this dish both luxury and statement of prosperity. The stew was served in the family's best china, often bowls reserved exclusively for this annual tradition. Children sat wide-eyed as adults ladled the silky broth, their first taste of something sophisticated. Saltine crackers floated on top, softening into the warm liquid while oysters released their mineral essence. This wasn't everyday cooking, it was ceremony, a pause before Christmas Day that connected generations through shared anticipation and quiet reverence. Lane cake was the showstopper of Southern black Christmas gatherings, a towering creation demanding skill and ingredients that pushed household budgets to their limits. Named after Emma Rylander Lane of Alabama, this cake featured delicate white layers filled with bourbon, raisins, coconut, and pecans cooked until thick and glossy. Black women adapted the recipe across generations, adding their own touches, more bourbon for some, candied cherries for others, while maintaining its legendary character. The filling required constant stirring over low heat, a meditative process that couldn't be rushed. Assembling the cake took steady hands, each layer carefully balanced before being crowned with fluffy white frosting. Lane cake appeared on Christmas sideboards throughout Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia, signaling the family had spared no expense for the holiday. Today, few bakers attempt its complexity, letting this masterpiece fade into memory. Homemade eggnog was the celebratory drink that transformed black Christmas gatherings into occasions of warmth during the 1960s and 70s. Families whisked together fresh eggs, sugar, heavy cream, and whole milk until the mixture became thick and velvety. The addition of bourbon, rum, or brandy, sometimes all three, elevated this drink from refreshment to liquid celebration. Nutmeg was grated fresh over each glass, its aromatic oils releasing fragrance inseparable from holiday memory. Grandmothers kept recipes closely guarded, adjusting sweetness and spirits to family preference while maintaining essential richness. Children received portions without alcohol, watching adults with curiosity as glasses were refilled and laughter grew louder. The drink was served cold in crystal punch bowls, its pale yellow color brightening tables already laden with treats. Making eggnog from scratch required time and quality ingredients that instant mixes could never replicate. Oyster dressing brought coastal abundance to black Christmas tables, transforming traditional cornbread stuffing with the addition of fresh or canned oysters folded throughout. This dish traced its roots to Lowcountry and Gulf Coast communities where oysters were plentiful, and families understood how their briny essence could elevate simple ingredients. The cornbread base was crumbled and mixed with sautéed celery, onions, and bell peppers before oysters, and their liquor were stirred gently through. Sage, thyme, and black pepper provided seasoning, while butter and broth kept everything moist during baking. The dressing emerged with a golden crust hiding tender oysters within, each bite delivering richness that regular stuffing could never match. Families saved this preparation exclusively for Christmas. Understanding its complexity demanded special occasions. The dish represented Black culinary sophistication, proving Southern food could be both humble and elegant. Hogmaw stuffed for Christmas was a centerpiece dish demonstrating the resourcefulness passed down through generations of Black families. The pig's stomach was cleaned meticulously before being filled with seasoned sausage, potatoes, onions, and cabbage. Slowly roasted until the outer skin turned crispy and the filling became tender, this dish could feed entire extended families gathering for holiday celebrations. The preparation connected Black Americans to Southern roots and traditions stretching back through slavery, when using every part of the animal meant survival. Sliced thick and served with greens and cornbread, hogmaw delivered rich porky flavor that satisfied the deepest hunger. Children who grew up eating this dish remembered its distinctive appearance long after leaving home. Though rarely prepared today, hogmaw represented the whole animal cooking that defined Black foodways for generations. Syllabub was the elegant Christmas punch that graced Black parlors and dining rooms when families wanted to impress guests with something sophisticated and celebratory. This frothy drink combined cream, sugar, and wine or sherry, whipped until it became light and airy with a layer of foam floating delicately on top. The origins stretched back to colonial America, where Black cooks in wealthy households learned the technique and eventually brought it to their own family tables. Making proper syllabub required whisking by hand until arms ached, a labor of love that couldn't be shortcut without sacrificing the essential texture. The drink was served cold in the family's finest glasses, its pale color and cloud-like appearance suggesting refinement and celebration. Some versions added lemon zest or nutmeg for complexity, while others kept the flavor pure and simple. Syllabub appeared at Black Christmas gatherings as a symbol of elegance and aspiration, proof that holiday celebrations deserved beauty alongside abundance. Hoghead cheese appeared on Black Christmas buffets as a savory counterpoint to the sweet desserts and rich main dishes that dominated holiday tables. This wasn't cheese at all, but a cold meat preparation made by simmering the pig's head with onions, vinegar, and spices until the meat fell from the bone. The cooking liquid, rich with natural gelatin, was mixed with the shredded meat and pressed into loaves that set firm when chilled. Sliced thin and served cold with crackers or bread, Hoghead cheese delivered intense porky flavor brightened by vinegar's tang. Black families throughout the South prepared this dish in the days before Christmas, letting it set overnight so it could be sliced and arranged on platters. The preparation required skill and patience, knowing exactly when the meat was tender, how much vinegar to add, how firm the final product should be. Hoghead cheese represented the nose-to-tail cooking philosophy that ensured nothing from the holiday hog went to waste. Brandied peaches were the jeweled preserves that Black grandmothers tucked into cupboards each summer, waiting for Christmas morning when they would finally appear on breakfast tables. Fresh peaches were carefully peeled and halved, then simmered in sugar syrup infused with cinnamon, cloves, and generous amounts of brandy until they became translucent and deeply perfumed. The preserved fruit was ladled into glass jars and sealed, their golden contents visible through the glass, like edible treasures. By December, the peaches had absorbed the brandy completely, their flesh soft and boozy with complex sweetness that balanced fruit, spice, and spirits. Served alongside ham and biscuits, they cut through the richness of holiday breakfast while adding their own sophisticated note. Children were usually given only the syrup, while adults savored the brandied fruit that represented months of anticipation. These preserves required summer's abundance and December's patience, connecting the seasons through flavor. Pralines were the Christmas candy that Black families in Louisiana and across the Gulf Coast made in batches large enough to fill tins for giving and keeping. These creamy pecan confections required cooking sugar, butter, and cream to the precise temperature where candy transforms from syrup to something miraculous. The mixture was dropped by spoonfuls onto waxed paper, each praline spreading into a disc with pecans suspended throughout like jewels in amber. Getting the temperature right meant the difference between pralines that melted on the tongue and those that turned grainy or refused to set at all. Grandmothers tested readiness by dropping bits into cold water, watching for the soft ball stage that signaled perfection. The candy was often made in the days before Christmas, stored in tins lined with waxed paper and brought out for visitors who expected this hospitality. Pralines represented the intersection of French, African, and American traditions that made Louisiana cooking unique. Ambrosia was the celestial dessert that appeared on black Christmas tables in cut glass bowls, its layers of fresh fruit and coconut glistening like edible jewels. This wasn't the simplified version made with canned fruit cocktail. Proper ambrosia required cracking fresh coconuts to extract their sweet meat and milk. Grandmothers would pierce the coconut's eyes, drain the liquid, then crack the shell with hammers before prying out the white flesh to be grated by hand. Fresh oranges were peeled and sectioned, their membranes removed so only tender segments remained. Layers of coconut, orange, and sometimes pineapple were built in serving dishes, each level dusted with powdered sugar. The finished ambrosia was chilled overnight, allowing flavors to meld into something heavenly. Children gathered hoping to taste the coconut milk or sneak a cherry before dinner. The dish represented Christmas abundance, a time when families splurged on ingredients that transformed ordinary fruit into something magical. Chitlins held a complicated but cherished place on Black Christmas tables, their preparation a ritual beginning days before the holiday that required dedication few modern cooks possess. These pig intestines demanded hours of cleaning, washing, scraping, and soaking in salted water until every impurity was removed. The smell during cooking was intense and unmistakable, announcing to neighborhoods that Christmas preparations were underway. Simmered slowly with onions, vinegar, and red pepper flakes, chitlins transformed into a delicacy that divided even family members. Those who loved them anticipated Christmas morning when platters appeared alongside scrambled eggs and hot sauce. Those who couldn't stomach them quietly excused themselves. The dish connected Black Americans to ancestors who transformed discarded parts into sustenance, turning survival into celebration. Chitlins represented cultural memory, proof that dignity could be found in making something wonderful from what others threw away. Roasted pig's feet were the Christmas dish that required patience and an understanding that the best flavors often came from the least expected places. Black families would begin preparation by scrubbing and cleaning the feet thoroughly before seasoning them with salt, pepper, garlic, and often a splash of vinegar. Slowly roasted until the skin turned crispy and the meat became fall-apart tender, pig's feet delivered rich, gelatinous texture that coated the mouth with porky satisfaction. The collagen-rich broth that accumulated in the roasting pan was saved for gravy or soup. Served alongside collard greens and cornbread, this dish represented the nose-to-tail philosophy that had sustained Black families for generations. Children often wrinkled their noses at the appearance, but those brave enough to taste discovered flavors that lingered in memory. The feet were typically prepared by elders who understood the alchemy of transforming these humble cuts into something genuinely delicious. Sweet potato pone was the dense, caramelized dessert that emerged from Black kitchens during Christmas, its texture somewhere between pudding and cake with a sticky sweetness that satisfied the deepest cravings. Grated raw sweet potatoes were mixed with molasses, butter, eggs, and warm spices like cinnamon and nutmeg before being poured into heavy cast-iron skillets. The mixture baked low and slow until the top developed a dark, almost candied crust, while the interior remained moist and creamy. Unlike the lighter sweet potato pie, pone was substantial. A single slice could fill you for hours. Families made this dish when sweet potatoes were plentiful and affordable, stretching the humble root vegetable into something that felt like celebration. The recipe required no fancy ingredients, just patience and understanding of how heat transformed starch into sugar. Sweet potato pone appeared on holiday sideboards alongside pies and cakes, offering an earthier alternative to more refined desserts. Coconut layer cake towered over black Christmas dessert tables, its snowy white frosting and generous coating of fresh coconut making it look like something from a dream. Baking this cake was an all-day affair that began with cracking coconuts and grating their meat by hand, a task that left knuckles raw but filled kitchens with tropical fragrance. The cake layers themselves were tender white cake, sometimes flavored with coconut milk extracted from the fresh meat. Between each layer went fluffy 7-minute frosting, its glossy whiteness providing the perfect canvas for handfuls of shredded coconut pressed into every surface. The finished cake was often placed under glass domes to protect its delicate coating while it waited for Christmas dinner. Slicing revealed the snowy interior, each piece releasing the sweet perfume of coconut that had become inseparable from holiday celebration. This cake required skill that younger generations rarely developed. Boiled custard was the pourable Christmas dessert that Black families served warm in cups or chilled over cake, its silky richness occupying the space between eggnog and vanilla pudding. Making proper boiled custard required standing over the stove, whisking constantly as eggs, sugar, and milk slowly thickened without curdling, a transformation demanding patience and attention. The mixture was flavored with vanilla and sometimes a splash of bourbon, then strained through cheesecloth to ensure perfect smoothness. Served warm, it coated the throat with comforting richness on cold Christmas evenings. Poured over pound cake or fruitcake, it added moisture and sweetness that elevated simple desserts. Grandmothers kept their custard recipes closely guarded, each family's version slightly different in sweetness or spicing. Children begged for cups of the warm liquid, its eggy richness satisfying in ways that modern puddings never matched. Boiled custard represented the kind of patient, attentive cooking that has largely disappeared. Pigtail stew simmered on black stovetops during Christmas week, filling homes with aromas that announced both celebration and tradition. The tails were first cleaned and sometimes smoked, then braised slowly with tomatoes, onions, and whatever vegetables the cook preferred, often lima beans, potatoes, or butter beans. Hours of cooking transformed the tough, cartilaginous tails into something tender and rich, their natural gelatin thickening the stew into something substantial. The meat pulled easily from the bones, its porky flavor intensified by long cooking. Families served this stew over rice, the grains soaking up the flavorful liquid while providing the perfect base for the tender meat. Pigtails were inexpensive, allowing families to create abundance from modest resources. Children who grew up eating this stew remembered its distinctive flavor and texture, though few learned to prepare it themselves. The dish represented Black culinary wisdom, understanding that time and heat could transform the humblest ingredients. Watermelon rind pickles were the jewel-toned preserves that Black grandmothers made each summer and saved for Christmas morning's breakfast spread. The thick white rind of watermelons, usually discarded, was carefully trimmed of its green skin and pink flesh, then soaked overnight in lime water to ensure crispness. The prepared rinds were simmered in spiced syrup, heavy with cinnamon, cloves, and allspice, until they turned translucent and took on the amber color of the cooking liquid. Packed into mason jars, these pickles aged in pantries until the holidays, when they appeared alongside ham and biscuits. Their taste was unexpectedly delicious, sweet, tangy, and warmly spiced with a texture that snapped between the teeth. The pickles represented the waste-nothing philosophy that had sustained Black families through hard times, transforming what others threw away into something worth savoring. Few modern cooks invest the time these preserves required. Persimmon pudding was the seasonal dessert that Black families made only when wild persimmons ripened after the first frost, their astringent flesh transformed into something honeyed and complex. Gathering persimmons required knowing which trees produced the sweetest fruit and waiting until frost had worked its magic. Eating them too early meant a mouth-puckering experience no one forgot. The ripe fruit was pushed through sieves to remove seeds and skin, creating a thick pulp that became the pudding's base. Mixed with flour, eggs, butter, and spices, then baked until set, persimmon pudding emerged dense and dark with a flavor unlike any other dessert. It tasted of autumn transformed into winter, of patience rewarded with sweetness. families served it warm with whipped cream or hard sauce during Christmas week, its presence on the table signaling that someone had invested the considerable effort required. Persimmon pudding connected Black families to the land and seasons in ways modern desserts never could. Neckbones and rice was the Christmas Eve supper that sustained Black families before the abundance of Christmas Day arrived, its rich broth and tender meat providing comfort and anticipation. Pork neckbones were browned until caramelized, then simmered with onions, garlic, and bay leaves until the meat fell from the bone and the liquid became thick with natural gelatin. The braising liquid, dark and intensely flavored, was ladled over rice that absorbed every drop of porky goodness. This wasn't fancy food. It was soul food, in the truest sense, nourishing body and spirit while using inexpensive cuts that stretched budgets during an expensive season. Families gathered around tables on Christmas Eve, eating neckbones and rice while anticipation for the next day's feast built. The dish required little more than time and heat, yet it delivered satisfaction that expensive cuts couldn't match. Neckbones represented Black culinary wisdom about extracting maximum flavor from minimal resources. Rum balls were the no-bake Christmas confections that Black grandmothers assembled in church kitchens and home pantries. Their boozy sweetness meant strictly for adult palates. Crushed vanilla wafers were mixed with cocoa powder, powdered sugar, and corn syrup before generous splashes of dark rum transformed the mixture into something that could be rolled into balls. The finished candies were coated in powdered sugar or chopped pecans, then stored in tins where they aged as the rum permeated every particle. These weren't children's treats. The alcohol remained potent and uncooked, delivering warmth that spread through the chest. Women exchanged rum balls as gifts, each batch slightly different depending on the baker's preferred rum. The candies appeared on dessert tables alongside cookies, their dark color and dusted coating signaling sophistication. Making rum balls required no oven, just patience and willingness to work the sticky mixture until it held together. They represented holiday indulgence that has quietly faded. Divinity candy was the snow-white confection that tested Black cooks' patience every Christmas, its success dependent on weather, timing, and prayers that the sugar would set properly. This ethereal candy was made by cooking sugar syrup to the hardball stage, then slowly pouring it into beaten egg whites while mixing constantly until thick and cloud-like. Pecans were folded through before the mixture was dropped onto waxed paper, each mound setting into pillowy perfection, or collapsing into sticky failure if humidity interfered. Grandmothers refused to attempt divinity on rainy days, knowing moisture would prevent proper setting. When it worked, divinity melted on the tongue with sweetness that seemed to float. The candy was often tinted pink or green for holiday color, arranged on platters where it looked like edible clouds. Divinity represented temperamental candy making requiring experience and intuition, skills that fewer cooks now possess. Crackling cornbread was the Christmas breakfast staple that transformed rendered pork fat into something crispy and essential to Black holiday mornings. Cracklins, the crispy bits left after rendering lard, were folded into cornbread batter before baking, their porky crunch adding texture that plain cornbread couldn't match. The cornbread was baked in cast-iron skillets preheated with bacon drippings, creating a crust so crispy it shattered when broken. Families who raised their own hogs saved cracklins specifically for Christmas, understanding this ingredient connected the holiday to autumn butchering. Served alongside eggs, ham, and red-eye gravy, crackling cornbread provided the perfect base for sopping up flavor. Children who grew up eating this bread remembered its distinctive texture long after leaving home. The dish required access to freshly rendered cracklins that modern cooks rarely produce. It represented the complete cycle of raising, butchering, and celebrating that defined rural Black life. Mincemeat pie carried centuries of tradition to Black Christmas tables, its dense filling of fruits, spices, and sometimes meat creating flavors unlike any other holiday dessert. Black cooks adapted English traditions, filling jars with mixtures of raisins, currants, candied citrus, apples, suet, and warm spices that aged for weeks before Christmas. The filling was spooned into pastry shells and baked until golden and bubbling with concentrated sweetness. Some versions included minced beef or venison, honoring the dish's origins, while others relied on fruits and sweet for richness. The taste was complex, sweet, spicy, and slightly boozy from preserving brandy. Mincemeat pie was served warm with hard sauce or whipped cream, its intensity balanced by cool richness. Families who made their own mincemeat understood the planning required, starting in late fall. This ancient dessert has largely disappeared from modern Christmas tables, replaced by simpler sweets. Pickled pig ears appeared on Black Christmas buffets as the briny, chewy delicacy that only the adventurous truly appreciated. The ears were first cleaned thoroughly and simmered until tender, then sliced thin and packed into jars with vinegar, onions, and hot peppers. Weeks of pickling transformed the cartilaginous ears into something tangy and satisfying, their unique texture providing contrast to the rich meats and sweet desserts dominating holiday spreads. Served cold, straight from the jar, pig ears were eaten with crackers or simply picked up and savored by those who understood their appeal. Children often wrinkled their noses, but elders who had grown up with this dish looked forward to its appearance each Christmas. The pickled ears represented the waste-nothing philosophy that had sustained Black families through generations of scarcity. Making them required planning and patience. The ears needed weeks in brine to develop proper flavor. Few modern cooks undertake this preparation anymore. Christmas potato salad was the creamy, tangy side dish that appeared on Black holiday tables with as much ceremony as the ham it accompanied. Unlike summer picnic versions, Christmas potato salad was richer and more elaborately prepared, often including chopped eggs, sweet pickles, celery, and sometimes olives that elevated it above everyday fare. The potatoes were boiled until just tender, then dressed while still warm so they absorbed the mayonnaise and mustard mixture completely. Grandmothers made this salad the day before Christmas, letting it chill overnight so flavors could meld into something greater than the sum of simple ingredients. The salad was served in the family's best bowl, its pale yellow color dotted with the red and green of pimentos and pickle relish. Every family had their own version, some sweeter, some tangier, some with ingredients kept secret from curious neighbors. Christmas potato salad represented the kind of made-from-scratch cooking that has given way to deli counter convenience. Giblet gravy was the rich, deeply flavored sauce that transformed Christmas turkey from simple roast into something memorable and soul-satisfying. The turkey's neck, heart, gizzard, and liver were simmered for hours with onions and celery until they became tender, and the cooking liquid turned into concentrated poultry essence. The cooked giblets were chopped fine and returned to the broth, which was thickened with flour and seasoned until it reached gravy perfection. This wasn't the pale gravy from packets. Giblet gravy was dark, complex, and carried the unmistakable taste of Christmas dinner. Black cooks understood that the giblets, often discarded by hurried modern cooks, contained flavor that the breast meat alone couldn't provide. The gravy was ladled generously over turkey, dressing, and mashed potatoes, tying the entire meal together. Children who grew up with giblet gravy found commercial versions impossibly bland by comparison. Making proper giblet gravy required patience and the willingness to use every part of the bird. Cornmeal cookies were the humble Christmas treats that Black grandmothers baked when butter cookies seemed too expensive. These simple cookies combined cornmeal with flour, sugar, eggs, and whatever fat was available, lard, shortening, or butter, creating a texture both crumbly and satisfying. The cornmeal added subtle grit and earthiness that distinguished these cookies from refined flour cousins. Flavored with vanilla, nutmeg, or lemon zest, they were cut into simple shapes and baked until golden. Children loved them for their sweetness, and adults appreciated their practicality. Cornmeal stretched further than expensive flour alone. The cookies were packed into tins and given as gifts, their modest appearance belying the care in their creation. Cornmeal cookies represented the creative economy of Black baking, turning inexpensive ingredients into something worth sharing. They have largely disappeared as commercial cookies became cheaper than homemade versions. Mayhaw jelly was the rare Christmas preserve that appeared only in homes where someone knew the wild secrets of southern swamps and bottomlands. Mayhaws, small, tart fruits that grew on trees standing in shallow water, were gathered in spring, their brief season demanding quick action from those who valued their unique flavor. The fruits were boiled and strained to extract ruby red juice that was cooked with sugar until it gelled into something both tart and sweet, unlike any store-bought preserve. Black families in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama treasured this jelly, saving it specifically for Christmas breakfast when it appeared alongside biscuits and country ham. The flavor was complex, fruity, but with a wild edge that spoke of places where only the determined ventured. Making mayhaw jelly required knowing where the trees grew, arriving at precisely the right moment, and understanding the temperamental nature of gelling. This regional treasure remains largely unknown outside its home territory. Molasses pull candy was the Christmas treat that turned candy making into family entertainment, requiring strength, patience, and plenty of buttered hands. Molasses was boiled with sugar until it reached the hard crack stage, then poured onto greased marble slabs or buttered platters to cool. When the candy had cooled enough to handle but was still pliable, family members would begin pulling, stretching the dark mass between buttered hands until it lightened in color and developed the right texture. Children took turns pulling, their arms growing tired as the candy transformed from sticky darkness to golden strands. The finished candy was twisted into ropes and cut into pieces that hardened into chewy treats with deep molasses flavor. Making pull candy was as much about togetherness as about the final product. Families gathered in kitchens, laughing as sticky candy stretched between them. This communal candy-making tradition has largely vanished from Christmas celebrations. Fried chicken gizzards turned organ meat into crispy, chewy bites that cost almost nothing per pound, but satisfied like expensive steaks never could. The gizzards were thoroughly cleaned, boiled until tender, then dredged in seasoned flour mixed with paprika, garlic powder, cayenne, and black pepper, before being deep-fried until golden brown. The result was crunchy outside with firm, meaty texture inside that delivered protein and iron while costing fractions of what chicken breasts cost at any market. Street vendors sold them in paper bags at fish shacks and corner stores throughout Black neighborhoods during weekends and celebrations. Families made them at home for weekend gatherings, serving them with hot sauce and saltine crackers for perfect combination. In the 1970s, gizzards cost less than 50 cents per pound, making them accessible protein for families on impossibly tight budgets. Fried gizzards represented refusal to waste any part of the chicken, transforming organs into genuinely delicious food people actively craved. Cheese wafers made with sharp cheddar and butter created crispy, salty crackers that children munched by the handful, their homemade quality far superior to anything store-bought could offer. Grandmothers would cream softened butter with finely shredded sharp cheddar cheese, then gradually add flour, salt, and cayenne pepper until the mixture formed a stiff dough. The dough was rolled into logs, wrapped in wax paper, and chilled until firm, then sliced into thin rounds and baked until golden brown and crispy. As they baked, the cheese melted into the butter and flour, creating crackers that were rich, savory, and addictively crunchy with just a hint of heat from the cayenne. In 1970s Black households, cheese wafers represented Southern tradition and hospitality, recipes that had been passed down through generations. Children loved cheese wafers because they tasted like cheesy potato chips but felt more sophisticated since they were homemade. Lard cakes were the sweetheart of hard times, the kind of dessert that brought back joy when butter was a dream. Made from flour, sugar, and a scoop of lard saved from breakfast, they baked up soft and fragrant. The smell filled the house, buttery without butter, rich without cream. People called them poverty cakes, but they tasted like victory. The lard kept them moist for days, and a touch of spice or molasses made them taste like something from a bakery. Children licked the crumbs from their fingers, not caring that it came from the same jar used for frying eggs. Every family had their own version, some with raisins, some with cinnamon, each one proud and personal. Lard cakes were a reminder that sweetness was not about luxury, it was about invention. They were proof that love could rise from scarcity, baked golden in worn pans and shared without shame. In kitchens filled with laughter and thrift, lard cakes turned necessity into delight. Chicken neck gravy was the very definition of stretching scraps into a full meal. Poultry was expensive and few families could afford large cuts, so nothing from a chicken ever went to waste. Necks were simmered slowly to release every bit of flavor, then thickened into a gravy with flour and drippings. Poured over rice, mashed potatoes, or biscuits, it transformed the cheapest part of the bird into something filling and comforting. Families looked forward to it because it stretched one bird into several meals, ensuring nothing was thrown away. This kind of resourcefulness defined survival cooking, and for many Black families in the South, it was routine. Chicken neck gravy might not have been glamorous, but it represented pride in making the most out of very little. It also carried the feeling of home, the scent of gravy simmering on the stove, and the relief of knowing everyone at the table would leave fed. Molasses stack cake was the layered reunion dessert that carried Appalachian history into Black family gatherings where traditions blended and traveled through generations. Thin cake layers were baked one at a time in well-greased pans, each one soft, warm, and smelling of ginger cinnamon and deep molasses, sweetness. The filling was made from cooked molasses or spiced fruit spread into glossy layers that softened the cake as it rested overnight, turning the entire stack into a tender, richly flavored dessert that cut cleanly into tall slices. The cake was humble yet impressive, built from repetition, patience, and steady hands, moving in practiced rhythm across the kitchen. At reunions, it stood out because its flavor was warm and old-fashioned, and its height made people gather around with curiosity and appreciation. Every bite carried slow winter baking, homegrown molasses, and the memory of cooks who stretched ingredients into something celebratory. Molasses stack cake tasted like time effort and love stacked carefully into something sweet enough to share across an entire family. Fatback and greens created the foundation of countless soul food meals, with cured pork fat transforming bitter vegetables into something genuinely crave-worthy and absolutely delicious. Thick slices of fatback were rendered slowly in cast-iron skillets until the fat melted out and the remaining meat crisped into cracklings worth fighting over. Collard, mustard, or turnip greens were added to the rendered fat, along with vinegar, hot sauce, and seasonings, then cooked low and slow for hours until tender. The greens absorbed the pork fat's richness, becoming flavorful while maintaining some of their natural bite and texture throughout cooking. The potlikker that resulted was considered liquid gold, sipped from bowls or soaked up with cornbread hungrily. In the 1970s, fatback was among the cheapest items at any butcher, often costing less than butter per pound for families watching every penny. Fatback and greens represented maximum flavor from minimum investment, proving that fat wasn't the enemy, but rather the key. Stuffed celery with cream cheese and pimento created colorful boats that children picked up by their crunchy handles, the creamy filling contrasting perfectly with the crisp, fresh vegetable that provided texture amidst holiday indulgence. Mothers would wash and trim celery stalks, cutting them into 3-inch lengths before drying them thoroughly and arranging them on serving platters like little canoes. The filling was made by beating cream cheese until fluffy, then folding in diced pimentos, mayonnaise, and seasonings like garlic powder, onion powder, and black pepper. The cream cheese mixture was spread generously into each celery groove, mounded slightly and sometimes garnished with paprika, chopped olives, or crispy bacon. In Black households during the 1970s, stuffed celery represented an attempt to include something fresh among heavier holiday offerings. Children loved them because the cream cheese provided richness while celery added refreshing crunch. Eggshell pudding was an act of pure ingenuity, a sweet custard built from things no one thought could be used. Families saved eggshells, washed and dried them, then ground them into powder for extra calcium. That powder went into milk, sugar, and cornstarch, stirred together until it thickened over the stove. It set in jars or bowls, smooth and pale, a dessert that looked humble but held the taste of patience. It was soft, slightly sweet, and carried the faint scent of vanilla if a family could afford it. Children thought it was magic, how scraps turned into something good. It filled more than bellies. It filled hearts with gratitude. Eggshell pudding was the promise that nothing had to go to waste, that even the smallest fragments had purpose. In every spoonful was the spirit of endurance, a quiet hymn to survival sung right from the kitchen stove. When the cake was finally unmolded, it stood tall and golden with a firm crumb that sliced cleanly and never crumbled, even when carried from house to car to reunion hall. Some families preferred it plain, letting its soft, buttery flavor shine, while others poured a glossy lemon glaze over the top, letting it drip down the sides and cling sweetly to the edges. Pound cake was beloved because it tasted like effort and patience, and because it fed a crowd without ever needing decoration. It traveled well, sat proudly on every dessert table, and never failed to disappear slice by slice as people passed by with paper plates in hand. It was not dramatic, but it was unforgettable because it tasted like home gathering stories and hands that knew exactly how long to beat the batter. Peanut soup had deep roots in West African cooking and carried over into the kitchens of Black America during times of scarcity. Families would boil peanuts until soft, grind them into a paste, and whisk them into broth with onions and seasonings. The result was a creamy, nutty soup that filled stomachs without relying on expensive meat. Because peanuts were widely available and inexpensive, this dish became a dependable source of protein and comfort. It could be served plain with bread or thickened with vegetables to stretch even further. Children grew up tasting peanut soup as a warm, sustaining dish that soothed hunger while carrying the echo of older traditions. The flavor was earthy and satisfying, reminding families of both resilience and cultural roots. Peanut soup showed that the most affordable ingredients could still produce something memorable, sustaining entire households during difficult seasons. It was not just soup, it was survival food with heritage poured into every bowl. Mustard greens with ham hocks delivered bitter, peppery flavors that balanced the smoky pork perfectly while providing vitamins and minerals essential for health and sustained well-being. The greens were cleaned thoroughly, then cooked low and slow with ham hocks, onions, vinegar, and hot sauce until tender, but still maintaining some texture throughout. The bitterness mellowed during cooking, balanced by the pork's saltiness and the vinegar's tang, creating complex flavors that developed over hours of patient simmering. The potlikker was considered especially valuable, packed with vitamins leached from the greens and rich with pork flavor worth savoring. Families served this with cornbread and hot sauce, with children learning to appreciate the bitter notes that many initially resisted eating. In the 1970s, mustard greens grew easily in southern gardens and could be purchased cheaply at markets when homegrown weren't available for picking. Mustard greens with ham hocks represented southern cooking wisdom, showing how proper preparation made even bitter vegetables into food people actually wanted to eat. Pan-fried gizzards were the kind of meal that proved patience was as important as any spice. Tough and chewy at first, these scraps of poultry were transformed through slow cleaning, seasoning, and frying into golden bites of pride. A bowl of seasoned flour, a splash of buttermilk, and a hot cast-iron skillet were all it took to turn what most people ignored into something worth gathering for. The gizzards hissed in oil until they were crisp on the outside and tender within, each one carrying the smoky taste of hard work and heart. Families would pile them high on paper towels, watching the steam rise like a promise that dinner was ready. Every batch felt earned, every crunch a reminder that flavor came from care, not wealth. Children gnawed at the edges, soaking the last bits in hot sauce, while elders nodded in approval. Pan-fried gizzards were food that spoke of resourcefulness, a celebration of making something special from nothing. They filled kitchens with the sound of sizzling survival, the scent of seasoning that lingered long after the plates were empty. In every bite was proof that thrift could taste like triumph. Sock it to me. Cake arrived at reunions in heavy bundt pans, carried carefully by aunties who knew the warm, spiced swirl inside would be gone before the day ended. The batter was mixed thick and smooth, then layered with a ribbon of cinnamon sugar and chopped nuts that baked into a hidden filling rich enough to earn its reputation. When the cake rose in the oven, the air filled with the scent of spice warmth and sweetness drifting through kitchens and across picnic shelters until people started asking who made it. Once cooled, it turned out beautifully with a golden crust and a tender crumb that sliced cleanly, revealing the dark, sweet swirl inside. A simple glaze poured over the top gave it a soft shine and made each slice taste like something crafted with skill passed down over generations. Sock-it-to-me cake became a reunion favorite because it felt special without being fussy, and because its comforting flavors made every person at the table feel welcome. Old-fashioned tea cakes tasted like quiet afternoons and childhood visits to Grandma's house, their soft sugar cookie texture carrying a gentle vanilla fragrance. Butter, sugar, and fresh eggs were beaten together until light, then mixed with flour and a hint of nutmeg to create a dough that chilled before baking. Rolled and cut into simple rounds, the cakes puffed slightly as they baked, filling the kitchen with a sweet, buttery aroma. Neither overly sweet nor bland, they struck a perfect balance that invited dunking in tea or milk. Families treasured these cookies for their simplicity and the way they invited conversation, often baking them in large batches to share with neighbors. In the 1970s, tea cakes were a quiet staple of African American hospitality, a link to centuries of tradition. Each soft bite carried the comfort of home and the memory of loving hands, reminding everyone that sometimes the most unassuming desserts are the ones that linger longest in the heart. Which Christmas soul food would you bring back to your holiday table? Share your memories in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe so we can keep these forgotten traditions alive together.